For the first time, Jamie Foxx is speaking out about the mysterious health emergency that left him fighting for his life. In a new Netflix special, the Oscar-winning actor reveals he suffered a brain bleed that led to a stroke in April of last year.
I just didn't want you to see me like that, man. You know, I want you to see me laughing, having a good time, partying, cracking a joke, doing a movie, television show. I didn't want you to see me with
He was born as Eric Marlon Bishop in a small town in Texas, a place where dreams felt far away and quiet nights were louder than applause. And no one could have imagined that this little boy would one day become one of the most talented stars in Hollywood. But even from the start, Jamie Foxx's life wasn't like others. It was shaped by rejection, loss, and silence. Because his parents left him when he was just a baby, and he was raised by his grandmother, who gave him love but couldn't protect him from the deep emptiness of feeling unwanted. And that pain stayed with him, even when he smiled, even when he made others laugh, because pain has a way of hiding behind jokes. And Jamie learned early how to hide it well. He became the funny kid, the smart kid, the talented one who could play the piano at 5 and tell jokes that made adults forget their troubles. And slowly, very slowly, that talent turned into something bigger, something that made people pay attention. And by the time he got to college, Jamie had a dream. A quiet but fierce dream to make it out of his small town, to be known, to be seen, not just as a comedian, not just as a musician, but as a star. And he took a strange risk when he started performing stand-up using a fake name, Jamie Foxx, because he noticed that women were called to the stage faster than men, and he thought the name sounded neutral enough to trick them. And it worked, and he opened a door. But behind every door was another wall. Because even with talent, the world doesn't hand out success easily, and Jamie had to fight for every inch, proving himself again and again, working jobs no one wanted, facing rejection after rejection, and still he kept going, pushing harder, funnier, faster, sharper, until he landed on the show in living color. As that changed everything, because suddenly millions were watching, laughing, cheering, and Jamie Foxx, the boy who once felt forgotten, was now unforgettable. But the spotlight is tricky because it shows you love but hides the shadows, and Jamie, now growing in fame, was about to find that out in the hardest way. He moved from comedy to acting, then to music, mastering each one like a man who didn't just want success, he needed it like oxygen, like proof that his pain was worth something. And when he played Ray Charles in the movie Ray, the world finally saw what he could really do. He became a legend overnight. Won an Oscar, sang songs that topped the chart and stood at the top of Hollywood. But people didn't see what it took to get there. They didn't see the long nights, the pressure to stay relevant, to never slow down, to always smile. And while Jamie's fame grew, so did the expectations, and so did the silence around his personal struggles. Because no one talks about what happens behind the curtain. No one asks what's really going on when the cameras are off. But there were signs, quiet ones, strange moments in interviews, long breaks from the public, odd rumors that came and went. And even as Jamie loved on screen, something in his eyes always looked tired, like a man carrying too much for too long. But the world didn't want to see that. They only wanted the performer, the entertainer, the genius, and Jamie gave them that. Until he couldn't anymore, because even the strongest voices can go quiet, and even the brightest lights can flicker. And now, looking back at his rise, you start to wonder, was it all too fast, too heavy, too painful underneath the surface? And what was Jamie hiding behind the jokes, the music, the characters he played so perfectly? Maybe the real story of Jamie Foxx isn't just about talent or fame. Maybe it's about a boy who grew up feeling invisible, who worked so hard to be seen that he forgot how to rest, how to ask for help, how to just be. And maybe, just maybe, the mystery of what really happened to him later started all the way back here in his childhood, in the silence of that small Texas town where dreams were big but love felt small. And a boy decided he would never be left behind again, no matter what it cost him. Jamie Foxx had everything most people only dream of: fame, money, awards, fans, and respect. But what they didn't see was the pressure that came with it. Pressure that started quietly and grew stronger every year. Because being good at one thing in Hollywood is hard enough, but Jamie was great at everything: acting, singing, comedy, producing. And that made people expect more and more from him every time he stepped out in public. And while the world saw a confident man who seemed to have it all under control, behind the scenes something different was happening, something darker. Because success doesn't just bring lights and cheers, it brings stress, fear, and a deep feeling that if you slow down even for a second, you might lose everything. And Jamie was caught in that cycle, trying to be perfect in every role, every performance, every interview. And it worked for a while. He starred in hit movies, released music that topped the charts, and walked red carpets with the biggest stars. But the higher he climbed, the harder it became to breathe. Because Hollywood doesn't care how tired you are, it only cares about what's next. And Jamie knew that if he stopped, someone else would take his place. So he kept going, always working, always appearing happy, always pushing himself to do more, even when his body was exhausted and his mind felt overwhelmed. And slowly, the cracks started to show. Not in big, obvious ways, but in small moments that most people missed. Strange pauses during interviews, long breaks between projects, and rumors that he was acting distant or strange on set. And people started to whisper, asking if something was wrong. But no one had answers, and Jamie never spoke about it because he was too proud, too strong, too determined to show weakness. And that's how it starts in Hollywood. First the pressure, then the silence, then the fear of being seen as broken. And the truth is, Jamie had been carrying the weight of his career, his image, and his pain for too long. And even though he had friends, fans, and family, he often looked like a man who was alone in a room full of people, like someone who had learned how to perform happiness even when he wasn't feeling it. And the scary part is, no one really knew how bad things were getting, not even those close to him, because Jamie was a master of control. Always able to turn on the charm, make a joke, smile for the camera, and convince everyone he was fine. But deep down, the truth was waiting, and it was getting harder to hide. And you could see it in his eyes if you looked closely. A sadness that didn't match his success. A weariness that couldn't be explained by a busy schedule. And the more famous he got, the more the pressure grew, until it felt like he was living in a bubble where everything was perfect on the outside but quietly breaking on the inside. And people started to notice that Jamie didn't seem as open anymore, that he was retreating from the spotlight in small ways, cancelling appearances, avoiding interviews, and taking on fewer roles. And instead of asking why, most people just moved on, assuming he was taking a break or working on something new. But what if that wasn't the full story? What if Jamie was battling something he couldn't talk about? Something bigger than stress or burnout? And what if the industry that once praised him had turned into a cage where rest wasn't allowed and silence was dangerous? And as the years passed, those moments of quiet started to feel less like choice and more like warning signs. Signals that Jamie was dealing with more than just fame fatigue. Maybe he was fighting with himself, trying to hold on to the person he used to be before the fame changed everything. And the sad part is, no one really knew how to help. Because when someone is that good at hiding their pain, it's easy to believe they act. And Jamie was a performer, one of the best. And he had spent his whole life making people feel good while he silently carried his own struggles. And now, looking back, those years of growing fame feel less like a dream and more like a slow storm building in the distance, a warning that something was going to break. And maybe it already was, little by little, under the surface, where no one could see it. And that's the part of the story people forget. Success can look like a blessing, but sometimes it's a burden. And for Jamie Foxx, the cost of being great at everything might have been too high, because no one can carry that much forever without something eventually falling apart. And what comes next in his story makes people ask the question they never thought they'd have to ask about someone like Jamie. What really happened, and why did no one see it coming? Everything seemed normal until it wasn't. Because one day, without warning, Jamie Foxx simply disappeared from the public eye, and no one really understood why. Not his fans, not the media, not even some of the people who had worked closely with him. And it all started so quietly, like a shadow slowly falling over the spotlight. Because at first, it was just a cancelled event here, a missed appearance there, a delay in a project, and people didn't ask too many questions because stars take breaks, right? But this didn't feel like a normal break. It felt like something had changed, something big. And soon the rumors began to grow, whispers that Jamie was dealing with a medical emergency, stories that didn't make sense, posts online that were quickly deleted. And all of a sudden, the man who had always been everywhere, on stage, in movies, on social media, was completely silent. And that silence was loud, louder than any announcement, because people started to realize that no one was giving real answers. Not his team, not his family, and certainly not Jamie himself. And the mystery deepened when his daughter posted online saying he had been hospitalized for a medical complication, but no one said what the complication was. And days passed, then weeks, then months, and still no clear update came out, just vague statements about recovery and privacy. And that's when people started to worry, not just fans, but people in the industry, reporters, even other celebrities, because it's not normal for a star that big to go completely dark for so long, especially someone like Jamie, who had always been so active and full of life. And questions started to pour in. What happened to him? Where was he? Why wasn't he speaking? Was it a stroke? Was it something worse? Was he even okay? And while the world waited, hungry for answers, the silence only grew. And with that silence came fear. And behind that fear came something darker, doubt. Because when no one talks, people start making up their own stories. And some of those stories were shocking, some even frightening. And the media began digging, looking for any clue, any piece of truth, but everything felt tightly controlled, like someone didn't want the full story to get out. And when a photo finally surfaced showing Jamie on a boat weeks later, it didn't help much because it raised even more questions. Why did he look different? Why didn't he speak to the camera? Was it really him or just a lookalike? And why was the video posted so suddenly, as if trying to stop people from asking more? And by now, the mystery had become something much bigger than just a health issue. It had turned into a global guessing game, and people began wondering if there was something Hollywood didn't want us to know, something behind the scenes, something hidden. And when other strange details started to come out, like his family avoiding interviews or people close to him refusing to give direct answers, it made everything feel even more suspicious. Like this wasn't just about privacy anymore, it felt like a cover-up. And the deeper you looked, the more confusing it became. And suddenly, Jamie Foxx's disappearance didn't feel like a normal celebrity break. It felt like a warning, a signal that something had gone terribly wrong and no one was willing to tell the full truth. And fans who had loved him for years were left with nothing but worry. Because how can a man so public just vanish and return without any real explanation? And how can so many people stay so quiet about it? And even now, months later, people still don't fully understand what happened during that time because there's still no real answers, just shadows, just silence, just a deep feeling that the Jamie Foxx we once knew had gone through something life-changing, something he might never speak about. And maybe that's the scariest part of all, that the truth might be hidden forever. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, something very strange began to happen around Jamie Foxx's disappearance. And it wasn't just the silence, it was the way that silence was being carefully managed. As if someone, or maybe many people, were trying hard to control the story. And that's when people began to notice the patterns, because the few updates that came out didn't feel like real news. They felt scripted, short, and too perfect. Like someone was trying to calm people down without really telling them anything. And when Jamie's daughter said he was recovering well and even playing pickleball, fans were confused because how could someone who was seriously hospitalized go from complete silence to playing a sport in just a short time? And the mystery only deepened when no video was shown, no public appearance was made, and not a single word came from Jamie himself. which felt completely out of character for a man who had always loved connecting with his fans. And the few photos or videos that did appear later raised even more questions than answers, because in one video he was waving from a car with sunglasses on and not saying a word, and in another he was on a boat smiling but still not talking. And people started to wonder, was he okay? Was he being forced to stay quiet? Or was there something they didn't want us to see? And while no one said it out loud, there was a growing feeling that something was being hidden. And it didn't help that celebrities close to Jamie also avoided talking about it. And some who were asked in interviews looked uncomfortable or changed the topic quickly, and fans began putting the pieces together, trying to understand why so many people were being so careful, and the theory started to spread. Some believed he had a serious stroke and didn't want the public to see his condition. Others thought it might be a bigger health crisis, and then there were darker ideas. Ones people were afraid to even say, about how powerful Hollywood is and how fast it can cover up anything it wants. And what if Jamie had been speaking out against something behind the scenes? What if there had been pressure or blackmail or a deeper reason he vanished? And while none of this could be confirmed, the fact that no one from his team denied anything clearly only made things worse, and it felt like a wall had gone up between Jamie and the world, one that wasn't built by accident, but by design. And when a strange report came out that he was in a top secret rehab center for serious complications, only to be deleted hours later, people got even more suspicious, because who was erasing stories and why? And why was there such a rush to make people forget the timeline, as if the public was being told to move on without ever getting the full truth? And then Jamie finally appeared in a short video message where he looked tired and thin and said thank you to his fans for their prayers. But even in that video, he avoided saying what actually happened, saying only that he didn't want people to see him in that condition, and that he had been through something he wouldn't wish on his worst enemy. And that line hit hard, because it confirmed what people feared. This wasn't something small, it was serious, and yet no real details were given. And that only raised more questions, because if it was so serious, why hide it? And if it wasn't, why make it seem like a life or death situation? And people began asking who was protecting what and why. And that's when another layer of mystery began to grow. The idea that this wasn't just about Jamie's health, it was about power, image, and silence. And in Hollywood, silence can be very expensive, because stars are brands, and brands must always look strong, clean, and sellable. And maybe someone decided that telling the truth would damage too much, maybe a movie deal or a contract or something deeper. And maybe Jamie didn't have the full choice to speak, or maybe he did but was scared of how people would react, or scared of what telling the full truth would reveal about the people around him. And now the world was left with this strange, incomplete picture of a man who had once been so opal, so lively, so full of energy, and now felt like a shadow of that person, carefully shown in flashes and sound bites, with no real answers. And behind it all, the biggest mystery remained: what really happened to Jamie Foxx, and why is everyone so afraid to say it out loud? The truth no one wants to say about Jamie Foxx is the one that scares people the most. Because it isn't just about what happened to one man, it's about what can happen to anyone living under the bright lights of fame. And now, after months of silence, strange videos, unanswered questions, and stories that never fully made sense, people are left wondering if they ever really knew Jamie Foxx at all. Because the person we saw on screen, the man who made us laugh, who sang from his heart, who played roles with such deep emotion, was suddenly pulled into a real-life mystery that felt more like a movie than anything he had ever acted in. And even though he finally spoke in a video, thanking fans for prayers and saying he had been through something very hard, he still didn't explain what it was. And that silence hit even harder than the rumors. Because when someone like Jamie, who always shared his life so openly, suddenly becomes distant and guarded, it feels like something bigger is going on, something he's afraid to speak about. And maybe that fear isn't just his, Maybe it belongs to the people around him, the industry that depends on his image, the companies that invested millions into his name. Because in Hollywood, the truth isn't always safe, and sometimes it's more dangerous than the lie. And if Jamie had gone through something that changed his body, his mind, or even his trust in others, then maybe the people around him didn't want that known because it would change how the world saw him. And that's the darkest part of this story. That a man could nearly die, could disappear for months, could come back looking different and sounding different, and still feel like he has to protect the very system that nearly broke him. And now, fans are left to guess, to wonder if he will ever be the same again. Then, or if something inside him was lost forever during those quiet months, and even though he has slowly returned to public life, appearing at small events, smiling again, even filming again, something still feels different, like he's walking with a weight we can't see. And the way the media moved on so quickly, the way no one demanded real answers, the way even his closest friends stayed silent, makes people wonder if this whole thing was carefully managed from the start, a script written behind closed doors to protect something we may never understand. And the truth, the one no one wants to say, is that maybe Jamie Foxx's story is not just a personal one, but a warning, a sign that the world of fame is not as shiny as it looks, that even the strongest stars can fall, and when they do, the people around them might care more about the business than the person. And now, when we see Jamie smile, we wonder if it's real. When we hear him speak, we listen for the pain he doesn't say. And when we look back on the months he was gone, we can't help but feel that something very big happened. Something bigger than illness. Something that shook him deeply. And maybe in time, he will find the strength to tell the full story. But for now, we are left with only pieces. A voice that sounds softer, eyes that seem a little older, and a man who went through something the world may never fully understand. And maybe that's why no one wants to say the truth, because it's not just about what happened, it's about what it means. That even someone as powerful, talented, and loved as Jamie Foxx is not untouchable, and that behind every smile we see on stage, behind every perfect scene in a film, there might be pain, fear, and a truth too heavy to speak. And that truth might not only change how we see Jamie, but how we see the entire world he lives in.